Hey everyone, welcome back to the Grounded Seeker podcast, the podcast dedicated to supporting non-dual seekers in emotional distress with integrating trauma and dysfunctional behavior in order to feel deeper authenticity, empowerment, and regulation through embodied root-level solutions. My name's Sam, and this is episode 12. So what if the very strategies that once kept you safe are now keeping you stuck? And not only that, but can be being co-opted by non-dual and spiritual teachings in sneaky ways. In this episode, I want to explore the Fawn response, which is essentially a deeply ingrained survival mechanism rooted in trauma, and how it really subtly and insidiously can shape your spiritual journey with things like people-pleasing, anger suppression, mistaking dissociation for transcendence and emotional numbing and these sorts of things. I want to look at the hidden ways, the really insidious hidden ways that this response is undermining your authenticity and connection to self, and really speaking from experience that this is something that I continue to unravel in myself. And the hope is that really to shed light on this, but also to provide a solution, which, I encourage embodiment practices toward the end to help you reclaim your power, honor your boundaries, and really move toward a more integrated and authentic expression of non-duality. So if you've ever felt disconnected between spiritual ideals and your lived experiences with painful emotions arising and difficulty with relationships and overgiving and all these sorts of things, and being the holder of space at the expense of yourself, for example, then you'll really get a ton out of this episode and a lot of awareness. I want to start this off by just getting clear on what the Fawn response actually is. And we'll go into much deeper clarification on how these show up in spiritual seeking and non-duality in just a little bit. But let's start with just a broad overview. The Fawn response is a trauma survival strategy, basically, where individuals and non-dual seekers prioritize pleasing others, avoiding conflict, seeking safety through compliance, loss of self. And then non-duality can even come in and reinforce that and encourage that in its pathological manifestation, where, there is no self. But when we lose ourselves, when we have such a, we're already in the business of losing ourselves so thoroughly that a practice like non-duality of oneness, where we just let go of all of our boundaries and sense of self, is very attractive to the traumatized mind. We can have hypervigilence. We can be constantly scanning the room. We're very intuitively inclined, where we're almost looking to the room very quickly. That's the first thing we notice when we walk in the room is, what are people thinking of me? Okay, let me try to look really peaceful and calm, like I'm resting as awareness. But if someone gets angry, if someone gets sad, I'm on high alert for that. And I'm going to make sure that I'm smiley, is to not rock the boat and just look really calm and collected, right? We also have difficulty saying no. We can over-apologize. We can rescue others. We can be the rescuer, and ultimately suppress a lot of our authenticity through emotional suppression through these early childhood, the need to do so, right? We just don't want to rock the boat and recreate the same dynamic that happened with our primary caregivers as a response from childhood, where we were denied, our authenticity was denied in insidious, continuous ways, or perhaps even very large and big T trauma, very significant traumatic events happening. Don't ever be bad again. Don't ever yell at me again, or you are going to get kicked out of this house. Something like that, versus, Sam, be a good boy. Stop getting angry. Be a good boy. And then you can feel from the whole energy and aura of the parent that doing such and acting out in a bad way is equivocal to abandonment in a way, or it's complete deep rejection. But hopefully you're getting the point. The Fawn response is one where we sort of lose our sense of self through complete and utter rejection of core aspects of who we are, And often it's through the suppression of anger, where we become like a deer in headlights around people, constantly surveying the landscape and constantly trying to like give ourselves over and compromise and sacrifice our needs and overgive so that we don't reactivate that old abandonment trauma or rejection or it's rejection of our authenticity. So spirituality is very sexy and very attractive to an individual, where we can just simply rest as awareness. If that's the pointing, if that's the non-dual pointing, if we're being really calm and peaceful and collected. When we have trauma, what is happening is we're feeding that wound through our teachings. Like, yes, let me be the calm and peaceful one who never rocks the boat. Let me read and cite the Heart Sutra and the Buddhist inquiries and may all beings be happy. May that being that's getting mad at me, who I would otherwise set a boundary with if I had my anger online, may they be happy. May they be peaceful. May they be liberated. But underneath, we're actually coming into contact with the same wounding that has since been calcified into a sense of numbness and a spiritual identity that we sort of dissociate from with resting as awareness with the fawn response. But the reality is we're so terrified of re-entering that authentic self-expression, and it's much safer to just simply rest as awareness and just notice things coming and going and being with sensation as it is, even if it's a uncomfortable freeze energy or numbness in the body that's actually storing a lot of trauma and data. That we might even use spiritual concepts such as, well, there's no one to even have a story, that I would need to even process this emotion. And maybe we can reference spiritual teachers who have told us this because they're probably bypassing their own shit. But we look to authority figures to have all the answers as well. So we disown our intuition and our discernment to look deeper into these places and take everything that they say to be truth, because we're so in the business of disowning ourselves, looking to other people and fawning to them. True awakening should include all parts of yourself, light and shadow. It should include the embodiment of your trauma. It should include the process of healing. Authentic peace comes from integration, basically, not from suppression. And resting as awareness, because again, as soon as we just double down on resting as awareness, we end up essentially just dissociating in a way and calling it insight and trying to look peaceful and clinging on to that until we suffer so much that we essentially can't keep doing that. And we really need to face what's underneath that as well. If we just try to go and transcend like I did, right into the spiritual realm or like awakening and transcendence, it's just not sustainable. When we have trauma, we need to face these aspects through the recognition of awareness as well. So it's not to disown this recognition of awareness, but it's to shed light of how we can co-opt this approach of resting as awareness to actually feed the trauma response, to get our needs met in the way that we developed through childhood, which are very trauma-driven and maladaptive, and cut our authentic expression off at the root. So we need to address that rather than doubling down on resting as awareness. Okay, so hopefully that's given a bit of understanding of how the fawn response can show up and where it comes from. So let's sort of explore more deeply of how this can sort of be co-opted in non-dual teachings through the lens of the traumatized mind. So first off, we're more than likely with this response going to have a fear of setting boundaries. So number one is we have a fear of setting boundaries, and when there's a big fear of conflict. And this can look like, avoiding boundaries out of a fear of being seen as looking as unspiritual, or like we have too much ego. Because if we're in a spiritual community, chances are a lot of people who come to spirituality, they have some degree of trauma, so they're also suppressing very significant aspects of self and coming across as looking very happy and spiritual and calm. But the truth is underneath that is also the front. And we can be fearful of judgment from other people. You know, if we set a boundary, people might think, well, we suspect people might think that, you know, oh wow, he hasn't really gotten the ultimate truth of reality. Yikes. Let's disregard him, you know, and let's go. I'll hang out with all the other people who are sort of bypassing and smile and act all smiley, while meanwhile I feel numb and painful and dread rejection underneath. And this sort of byproduct of this is we can also sort of like defer our awareness to spiritual teachers and gurus or authority figures without questioning it at all, because we have no internal boundaries. We sort of like merge with the teacher. We try to merge with the teacher such that they can save us. So we don't have any boundaries. We say, yes, they know the way. I don't know the way. And I'm willing to give myself so thoroughly without any sense of like who I am and what my authenticity is to the teacher. And in the process, we can really suppress our own intuition and discernment to avoid conflict with the teacher or with anyone in general. Because again, we don't really know like what it is we're feeling. We don't really know who we are as a result from the suppression of our emotions. You know, so, and this can come up in really pathological ways. If you've ever heard of the Jonestown incident, with the formation of one of the most iconic cults that led in mass suicides. You know, we can allow a teacher to overstep our boundaries. In the case of like Jonestown, this gentleman groomed hundreds of people, I think 800 plus people, to the point where at the end of his rule, you could say, where he created Jonestown, they all agreed to commit suicide, tragically, when the whole gig got exposed. And that's because there was more than likely, and I can't speak on behalf of these people, but I imagine this sort of behavior would be going on, where there's an inability to know oneself, allowing a teacher to sort of overstep boundaries in order to avoid conflict and rejection from the community. So we need to bring this discernment back online. You can see how harmful this can be when we don't know ourselves and we're so dreadful. It is dreaded, rather, to set boundaries out of fear of conflict. So it's incumbent on us to really reclaim and heal this trauma response, I believe. Otherwise, we can just give ourselves over. And in sort of like in tandem with this, number 2, I sort of made a list here of, you know, we give away our power to authority figures, and we're afraid of them actually because they represent the father. They represent the mother. They offer us guidance. So if we, because we disown ourselves through childhood and they inhabit that energy of the father or the mother, it's very easy for us to put authority figures on a pedestal and be afraid of them and to not rock the boat. So we might again defer to spiritual teachers or teachings and really suppress our personal intuition due to like we're acting out survival programs built on those childhood wounds. And I remember this for me, like when I was early in my spiritual path on these 10-day Vipassana meditation retreats with S.N. Goenka. I don't have any I think the teachings are fine, but I remember my consciousness at that time was so geared toward not trusting myself and looking outwardly and thinking, oh, okay, I need the spiritual teacher to save me. Such that like I was so vigilant to adhering to the technique's protocol and the way that it was prescribed. I need to do it this way because the teacher's saying, S.N. Goenka is saying it. And I think even in the practice, they say, don't use any other techniques, only use our technique while you're here, right? And it's sort of, again, that feeds into this wound of, okay, I'm not going to trust myself. I'm going to give all of my kudos, all of my energy toward the teacher. Now, that can, it's tricky, right? Because to some degree, there is an aspect of devotion and humility that we can give over. However, you can see how easy the Fawn response, trauma response, gives itself over to a spiritual teaching. And it looks like humility on the surface. But what it actually is a deep fear of rejection and trauma and fear of abandonment underneath that will get rejected if we don't adhere perfectly to what the authority figure is saying. Just again, like the little baby duck that, you know, if it does the wrong thing and its the mother duck bites it, we're going to avoid that at all costs because we need to get our needs met. And the teacher is acting like mum and dad. So we've got to be very careful with that. And again, these sort of all feed together. But number 3 is suppressing anger and assertiveness. Yeah, the fawn response, it often involves that. The huge aspect, probably one of the most significant aspects of the fawning energy is one of suppression of anger. And you see this widespread in spiritual communities. I believe that most people, a large portion of people in spiritual communities suppress their anger, like I did as well, that I'm working through and continue to unfreeze in my body and bring it back online, which feels amazing. Because ultimately we have this belief that, you know, anger it's unspiritual. And even when it's a healthy response to something like a boundary violation, we might really doubt ourselves because, again, we're getting that deep childhood trauma activated. And then all of a sudden we're standing up to a teaching or questioning a teacher even, or even just setting a small boundary like, hey, I don't like it when you do this. It triggers this very deep, painful, and I have a lot of empathy for it, actually. It's a really painful experience of, oh my God, did I say too much? Like, you know, basically this intense energy of maybe something like fear or like, I'm really sorry. You know, like it's like we second guess the living hell out of our like natural response to setting a boundary, even if it's necessary to protect our well-being, because that's how our nervous system from childhood interpreted it, right? So that can lead to all sorts of difficulties. And I like this analogy that Dr. Gabor Mate uses. When a person in an audience questioned Gabor on what does healthy anger look like, Gabor up on the stage says, well, okay, I'm talking to you now up on the stage. How do you feel about that? And I think the person's like, yeah, I feel okay. That's fine. And then Gabor says, well, how would you feel if I was right up in your face, 5 centimeters away from you, giving this talk? And the woman was a little bit apprehensive and it's like, well, I don't know, I'll push you away. And he's like, yes, good. Healthy anger, we need to push away what is unhealthy, because anger and these sorts of authentic emotions that are buried and create the fawn response, they essentially, you know, that we need to bring them online because they're our immune system. They keep out the bad things in our experience. So if we don't actually make that step to push that person away, which unfortunately we do in spirituality, it's almost encouraged, you know, in a way, in a subtle way, when we have these sorts of trauma responses, we really identify with things like passivity. And we have good intentions, but unfortunately this comes through. Like we just look like we're really peaceful and calm, but we're actually doing it to avoid connecting to our assertiveness and confronting this behavior head on, even if it's necessary, again, to protect our well-being. So we you know, with resting as awareness, we might sit there when someone's like yelling in our face, resting as awareness, you know, and use that as a metaphor. What else that could look like is something like a teacher is abusing us or something like that. And we're just sitting there resting as awareness, listening to it. And meanwhile, our body is contracting and tightening up. And what's actually called for is for us to say, hey, like, back off, you know, let me trust myself here. Like, get out of my face, right? Just fuck off. Something like that is actually required there. But of course, that's way easier said than done. So we need to gently and importantly, like, just slowly work at this conditioning and really get to the root of it to reconnect to the anger, which I'll dive into later as well, and how we can actually like really work with this in meaningful ways. And when we do this chronically, I'll just finish up point number 3, we can really build up hidden resentment toward others because we're really just unable to express our true feelings of anger or even our true feelings in general, largely with the fawn response. But it's pretty insidious. And, let me tell you, okay, I got a vulnerable sharing from my end with this. I remember like being in I was posting on YouTube a couple of years ago, and I remember somebody made this like harsh comment on one of these Vipassana videos. By the way, it's a style of meditation. I should have clarified, but I'm sure most of you know Vipassana. He made like a harsh sweep at me. And I remember like, because I was still suppressing my anger a lot in the process, I said something really, really lovely and spiritual back to him. Like, oh, I see, like, I really see your side. I really understand your side. And then I even added in the end, metta. Like, as if saying to him that, I'm sending you loving kindness. Thank you for your critique, even though it was sort of like and unfortunately, it wasn't a nice critique. I can't remember what it was, but just that process of trying to act spiritual. I remember like processing that later on. It just came up in a process randomly at one point because the body keeps the score. And I was finally able to connect. Oh my God, I'm so freaking angry at that guy. Why did I say that? I just and like finally feeling the anger of like that, what was actually there, but it was masqueraded with a feeling of like niceness and passivity. Just an example of that. Building resentment and holding resentment, and then using spirituality to like sort of butter it up and make it look really like spiritual, and to avoid these really painful feelings of being rejected or something like that, right? Number 4 is a really important one. Spiritual people pleasing. Sort of touches in, these all weave in together. But especially the aspect of being like a really, really good listener. That's a big one. I think that's a big one in spiritual communities. A lot of people like try to be the good listener, right? Just sitting there, like sort of like holding space, really just listening to every little detail. But underneath, they're actually thinking like, oh man, I just want to get away. When's this person going to stop talking? And also, I'm afraid of myself. I can't really express this, but I'm really afraid. I'm really afraid of speaking my authentic self and being true to myself and just saying, hey, like, just stop talking, please. Or we can avoid conflict through overgiving under the guise of like selfless service or oneness. For example, like we're staying in a toxic spiritual community to avoid being seen as like unspiritual, and like giving service at retreats in order to be seen as good, and like really being the good student or the one who has it together. It's like our heart is sort of in the right place. We're trying to like really be selfless. We're trying to really like cultivate these aspects of self. But when we miss the emotional root, that it's rooted in sort of like a fawn response, and that it's coming from trauma through lack of discernment and inquiry that we really need to cultivate if we're identifying with these traits so far, then we're sort of feeding that wound, unfortunately. And that can be hard to see that we're doing that until we really look at basically how is our body reacting to this process. Like, am I truly being authentic in this giving, or am I detecting that, oh yeah, there's actually a part of me that really just wants to give service so that I'm seen as good by other people because I'm terrified of them seeing me as bad and being a bad spiritual practitioner, thereby rejecting me from the community. Okay, I can see that. Yeah, wow. And as I liberate that and as I work through that, oh wow, all of a sudden, actually, I feel like I can give more authentically now. Number 5 is we can sort of like over-identify with spiritual and non-dual concepts. For example, again, this really comes back to facing and the fear of facing our authentic expression. When we deny our individuality, so we might use the idea of like no self, There is no one to suffer. There's no self to suffer. And we might use a concept like that very insidiously and sneakily, that's a word, to dismiss our needs, desires, and boundaries. And we can sort of butter it up like, I'm this spiritual being who's been on many retreats. I've been to all of these spiritual sacred sites in India. And we use this concept of no self to still anchor ourselves in this trauma response of fawning. And we're neglecting our needs, desires, and boundaries, and our fullest authentic expression of getting angry, of getting sad, of being joyful, in the name of it being sort of against a non-dual doctrine. So it's safer to identify with the spiritual concept of there's no one to do anything than it is to take ownership of a relational issue. I remember actually that what comes to mind is reading Jeff Foster's book, The Deepest Acceptance. And he has an analogy in there of his brother asking him to do the dishes. And Jeff's response was, when he was very ardently seeking, his response was, well, there's no one to do the dishes. That's a kind of funny example of over-identifying with non-dual concepts, but it's really harmful and it's dangerous when we do it from this fawn response. So I really want to encourage you to check that out and just really check yourself when you're doing that. And really the way you can do this is to check your body. What does your body feel? And how is your relationships with your friends, family, loved ones, wife, partner? Let that be your guide on whether or not these non-dual concepts are really, you're identifying with them to bypass something more primary underneath that. The sixth one is mistaking dissociation for transcendence. So I'll go through this one pretty quickly. And I remember I watched an entire course on this, paid course with Dr. Willoughby Britton, who makes plenty of amazing courses on the adverse effects of meditation. But yeah, sort of believing numbness or emotional equanimity and complete neutrality is a sign of spiritual transcendence. We might mistake dissociation, where our body flips, literally goes into a different brain state in order to not feel overwhelming stress. So it shuts off and it feels like this sort of different, lofty state of being that has evolutionarily been designed to cut us off from the painful feelings that we're actually feeling underneath. And this is prevalent with really intense trauma, especially with people who are in this sort of fawn category. Depending if your trauma upbringing was quite significant, there might be a tendency to dissociate. And so it's very attractive to rest as awareness, which feels to be, I think it's slightly different. And I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, but my determination on this is that resting as awareness is slightly different than dissociation, because dissociation is when there's significant stress and there's a literal brain state switch. But resting as awareness isn't, you don't necessarily have to be dissociated, although it can mimic the effect of dissociation. I'm not a psychiatrist, but this is my sense on it. But it has that same attractive, enticing effect of sort of distancing us from our emotions. And we can even use things like neti, not this, not that, non-dual inquiries to get away from that painful sensation of numbness or tension in our body. But the mistake we could make here is believing that that is a sign of spiritual progress. And there is value, obviously, in resting. I'm going to keep hammering that point that it is valuable to rest as awareness. Again, I think episode 2, I made an episode about how true self-recognition is very essential for healing. It's very valuable for healing. It's very valuable to be able to unblend from these painful states of being so that we have more space around them to go deeper into them and do more meaningful work. But yeah, it's just important to keep an eye out for that too. Another thing is like that sort of feeds into that previous one is toxic positivity. So I'll go through this one pretty quick because it's, we might sort of, use that sort of strategy of identifying with non-dual concepts and saying that everything's perfect as it is. It's all perfect. It's just this. It's just this. But then, what we're actually feeling is very strong trauma and blunting out our experience. And, we might really be shameful around this because we have these spiritual concepts of spiritual people shouldn't feel negative emotions. And we might even be involved in spheres and communities where it's sort of like covertly encouraged that everyone is really happy. And covertly means it's sort of like the unspoken reality. So everyone in the community might be really happy and like, I'm so joyful. God, I love the Dharma. I love everything. I love all the trees, the animals, and everyone's just constantly like that. But underneath, there's this itch. It's like, yeah, but you doing that, I can sort of feel that there's this. I can't be myself here. It's like if I show that I'm upset, then it's almost like I'll be judged. Like if you get angry, I'll accept you if you're really happy and lovely and spiritual. But as soon as you get angry at me, I'm going to give you the silent treatment. And I'm going to go really quiet on you. And I'm going to think to myself, that person's got to go do more inquiry. They're not spiritual enough. But then I'll present to them that, yeah, I'm so happy to be around you. And I'll even send you loving kindness. And I'll do all this and I'll do all that. But really, it's like this toxic positivity, and we can over-identify with that toxic positivity, which, it has obviously we've designed our psyche is, it makes sense that we would, even in that way. But it is important to point out that this can be actually manipulative. We're sort of covertly being nice and calm and spiritual to sort of onboard other people and shun them for expressing negative emotions like anger and these sorts of things, so that we don't recreate the family dynamics of early childhood. So in a sense, it's controlling. We're acting really nice and pleasant out of a fawn response, very pleasing, very, showing them that we're really happy and giving ourselves over to them and all this sort of stuff. But we're doing it so that they don't get angry, or they don't express the painful emotion that we've denied in ourselves, thereby being toxically positive and fawning and sort of keeping them in complicity with us. Number 8 is hypervigilance. Constantly scanning for cues about what others want or expect from us. So you imagine being on a retreat or something and you walk in and, okay, what's everyone thinking? How can I? And there's a natural element to this as humans, but this is sort of like it's hyper activated in people with trauma, with the fawn response. How can I not upset mum? How can I not upset dad? How can I posture myself and position myself and even create myself in such a way that is pleasing to them so they don't recognize, identify what I'm feeling and reject me? So I'm going to become what they need me to be so that I don't get rejected. So I'll be hyper vigilant, and I might even actually use this notion of being a very intuitive, sensitive healer as an identity that I'm sort of hiding behind as well, like to not really confront the fact that I might be deeply uncomfortable around this person. Number 9, rescuing or fixing others. This is another big one that we can identify with, being like the wounded healer. We feel really compelled to like save and fix others, even at their own expense. Maybe they don't even want it. It's almost like if somebody gets upset or if somebody expresses a painful emotion or something like that, it's as if the momentum of our psyche leans forward, is like, okay, someone's upset. Okay, how can I help? How can I help? Oh, let me fix, like, okay, tell me, let me just hold space for you. Let me hold space for you. And we overextend ourselves to meet others' needs. Really just being like, again, this sort of feeds back into being like the good listener, like just over listening and listening and listening and listening to this person without ever being able to say something, because our nervous system doesn't let us do this. Like, hey, can you please, like, I understand what you're saying is valuable, but would you mind if, I need some space now, or I need to express what's on my mind. Feeds into that. But yeah, really this leaning forward and this fixing and this savior energy, it can be exhausting on the system. And we might even wonder, why do I keep holding space for people? Why do I keep listening? Why do I keep trying to fix them? Why do I keep ignoring my own needs to focus on helping others? Well, it is a trauma response. So there's obviously value in helping and supporting, actually not rescuing, supporting others. But as long as it's coming from a regulated place and we're actually showing up in a way that's authentic, that I actually want to do this for this person. I don't feel obligated, because that's what the trauma response is. I need to rescue and fix others. If someone's upset, it's my responsibility, because I've learned to prioritize the needs of others over my own, and I'll give myself so fully to this person in the process. And in spiritual communities, this is very this can be very insidious and conditioned, and it's almost endorsed. It can be endorsed like, oh, this person's such a good listener, they're so helpful. And it's like, yeah, but bro, are they coming from trauma or what? So yeah, coming back to that authentic self expression is really the key here. And number 10, we can also struggle with intimacy. We might have real difficulty having authentically deep, connected relationships, because we're so in the business of disowning our authentic self to meet the needs of others, to become the person they want us to be, such that we really struggle to be authentic with like our partners, even our family, especially, because that's often where it develops, and in more recent relationships. So even though we might be quite astute at resting as awareness, being the silent witness, and these sorts of things, when we really get honest and audit our life, when we really look at the nitty gritty, we can identify that, like I feel consistently in relationships that I just want to avoid them entirely, because I don't want to show these authentic sides to myself. Because again, from childhood, from these traumatic responses, they're too dangerous to show, because it comes too close to that early learned pain that my nervous system has learned to mask by being this really good listener. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fawn and be the person that they want me to be at the expense of my authenticity. And I'm going to lose myself so deeply in the process that I don't even know who I am. So maybe what I'll even do as well, and this feeds into avoidant attachment as well, is I'll go and meditate in a corner, and I'll isolate myself from others, and I'll wonder why can I not get along? Why can I not connect with people? Why do I have such difficulty with friendships and relationships? It's because I can't show my authentic self from this very deep and early childhood wounding. So people might even wonder, I don't get it. One day he really likes me, but then he just goes and isolates, and I can't get along with him. I can't read him, because we're becoming what people want us to be. They don't even know the true us, because we've never shown them. We're hiding our true feelings to avoid rejection and abandonment that we encountered in childhood. So it's very, very painful, very painful. So those are 10 things. Those are 10 things that essentially how spirituality, how it can feed into non-duality. And personally, I definitely identify with being a really good listener. That was a huge thing for me. Working with people, even initially, early in my career, working as a facilitator, I even recall having days where I, would be seeing 4 people in one day, 4 or 5 people, and it was well beyond my capacity, holding the space. And I remember even like priding myself on this in like high school and like being a good listener, being at spiritual circles and feeling like I always have to listen as if my nervous system is like demanding that I do this, but really feeling drained in the process. So it was very painful. And I also identify, being the spiritual fixer and also morphing my attitude toward others' behavior, mirroring their expressions, and these sorts of things are all things that I've encountered. For example, like laughing at a joke I don't actually find funny in order to make sure that the other person feels comfortable, like feeling as if it's my responsibility to make the other person comfortable at my own expense, and like leaning too far in that direction. And of course, I identify with this thing of like resting as awareness as a strategy to not feel my authentic expression as well. Coming out of that non-dual paradigm that my this trauma response conditioned into me is very liberating. And yeah, there are big costs to this, like disconnection. We experience like a big gap between our spiritual ideals and our lived experience. So we might notice that, like being in spiritual circles and resting as awareness, we have this deep gnawing sensation of like something isn't right. And I don't know where to look to address it. And B, I think I'm kind of terrified to go there. And it can be scary initially, because it means that we might have to confront some of these early learnings and paradigms that we've built for ourselves, especially in like even in like spiritual communities, and really challenge the ways that we're showing up with people that have consistently come to see us as like the good listener, for example. It's like, oh my God, if I let go of being a good listener and set a boundary, will they abandon me? Oh God, yeah, our nervous system feels like that. But, once we have the tools to be able to process that and consistently meet it, it's just slowly, step by step, starting small. And I'll get into that. And it's definitely doable for anyone, no matter what your situation is. Authenticity, reclaiming that back is, I believe, to be very doable, as long as we have the perseverance and heart and patience to gently incline the mind in that direction. We can experience things like stagnation, like just suppressed emotions and unmet needs, which really our true growth lies in if we just keep resting as awareness and, noticing things come and go, like non-duality can encourage. Or we can have burnout, like over time, our people pleasing and our self-abandonment can lead to like an exhaustion and a resentment toward other people as well. Like, fuck, man, like I don't want to keep listening to these people. Maybe we're in a relationship where we're always listening to our partner and just constantly overextending our boundaries, and we can get like silently resentful in the background, like because we're unable to just say and like, hey, like I actually, I need my own time right now. Like, I'd prefer can you just listen to me for a moment? I really want you to hear this, something like that, right? So we get burnt out. And I imagine there's people in careers like nursing or being a doctor or being a helper, being even like therapists and stuff like that. This can really be a big problem. The exhaustion and resentment actually building for everyone, like hearing out everyone, but having no outlet for oneself and not being able to set boundaries to modulate that in a healthier direction. Yeah, but look, the good news is it's all doom and gloom so far, but I really want to encourage that there is a way out of this. And the first thing is awareness, right? We need to keep building in this awareness. And so we might want to sort of like, if this is really resonating, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, okay, non-duality is really bad. It's like, let's keep deepening in presence and recognition of presence. And in fact, there is some value in being able to be a witness to experience, to have some sort of equanimity. But if we're noticing a lot of these patterns that I've been pointing out, we need to face the reality that this isn't going to be sustainable long term. I mean, you could keep doing it, but it's your call, right? I don't want to keep doing that. I wouldn't want to keep being authentic personally. And I get that it can be very challenging to transition out of these places. So just let it percolate, let it sort of simmer. Maybe it resonates, maybe it doesn't. Okay, so what can we do with this fawn response? Well, let's walk through this quickly because this episode's getting long, but also touch into the depths of it. So the first thing we can do is obviously deepen in our metacognitive awareness. Where are we people pleasing? Where are we over giving? Where are we not meeting our needs? What emotions am I withholding? Is there conflict I'm avoiding? Is there a spiritual community that I feel like I've been a part of that just feels deeply wrong and I haven't been able to communicate my authenticity? Continuing to take a gentle but curious audit of your experience and seeing if you can correlate some of these symptoms that I've described so far to your experience. Okay. The next thing is really we need to look at bringing anger back online. That's probably one of the most powerful and potent ways. The most efficient way is to start getting in touch with healthy anger. And, so many spiritual seekers disown this. So I would encourage you, if you're really resonating with everything I've said, just notice what your body does when I mention getting in touch with your anger again. Does it bring up a lot of resistance? And that's good news because that resistance is actually very, very workable. You can definitely work with resistance to anger. But we want to reconnect to that inner no. And by bringing anger back online, by essentially unfreezing a lot of the fear around it and safely and gently as the system permits, with a bit of sternness as well sometimes too, because sometimes the system can say, I can't handle anymore, but that's actually keeping us from going to the anger. But then, we still got to hold it compassionately as well. Saying, okay, well, what's getting in the way? What am I afraid of if I were to sort of be more authentic and express my anger? And what's this fear that I'm feeling? What's that getting for me? Really connecting to the anger, really connecting. That's our life force. That's our power. That's our capacity that when that comes online, that's the energy of strong sovereignty, it's like the Donald Trump energy. I know a lot of people in spirituality hate Donald Trump. But if you look at him, you can actually learn things from Donald Trump, that he has that sort of warrior, assertive archetype. And we might actually judge him because we're afraid of our own assertiveness in ourselves. Now, my opinion is that Donald Trump needs to obviously bring some compassion online, because what's that saying that anger without compassion is abuse, and compassion without anger is manipulation, something like that. But if we harmonize both of those into one piece, because if we're fawning, we're probably quite good at the compassionate response. But if we reunite the anger into a cohesive unit, then that's where the juice is. So for a lot of people with the fawn response, it's about bringing that healthy anger back online by unfreezing the body part, the parts in us that say we can't get angry, and really meeting them with a lot of nurture and tenderness and care and skill to uproot them such that those paradigms are no longer needed and we feel at an embodied level that anger is okay. But, so the next thing we can do is start by setting small boundaries. Even if we don't have our anger fully online, we can just say no in low stakes situations. So say, for example, we're at a gathering and we're really polarized in this fawn response and somebody offers us some food and we're really not hungry. We could just practice saying, oh, no, thank you. That's okay. Or, in really small situations, just subtle things like that where we would otherwise say yes, and we can start to feel what that inner no feels like and slowly build it out. Another powerful thing we can do is we really need to start with this response essentially not conforming to other people's expressions. Like I mentioned before, one of the things that we can do is, or one of the things that I did was laugh at jokes that I didn't find funny. These sorts of things. So the fawn response is, it's very notorious for this sort of behavior where we sort of conform our expression to match theirs. So what I found is like an insight that dawned on me is usually it's almost like once you allow your attention to settle into your gut, into your lower belly, into like the solar plexus region of your system. And as you're talking to someone, you can try this. It's like keeping your attention there, because usually the fawn response, a lot of energy is from almost like the heart upward. It's very like up and out, like up and out. What are they thinking? What are they thinking? What are they thinking? But when you sort of let your attention soften down into your gut, which more than likely will probably be significantly tight and numb, maybe with some degree of openness that some people experience, that's more in your self energy, in your power. And when you're in that place, it's much easier to almost like have a bit of a break. So say that somebody's saying something to you and you're centered in that energy within yourself. There isn't that outward leaning movement that's trying to make them feel good all the time. While that can still be useful, and with the fawn response, we need to basically balance it back out by centering in ourselves and practice that authentic relating, where when you're speaking with someone, you're not conforming to what they need you to be. You're staying centered in yourself, and you're just playing around with, okay, what would be authentic for me to experience here? So it sounds easy on paper. If we've been doing this our whole life, it can be very difficult, especially if we're already activated in this like very strong fawn response tendency, or a freeze response as well. These sort of like coalesce. We're very numb, and we're feeling that strong momentum to want to conform and like laugh when we're not finding it funny, and just like smile all the time and all this sort of stuff. It can be very difficult, but keep that as an exercise and bring it into low stakes situations, and then you can work your way up gradually through the hierarchy. It's like a process, brick by brick, rather than everything off at once, but rediscovering that authenticity through connecting to your core emotions and your authentic emotions is very, very, very important and powerful for people recovering from this sort of fawn response. Another way that we can do is use imagination processes. So through somatic shadow work, which is what I do with people, if we were working with a fawn response or working with the fear around expression of anger, we can trace the wound of where that comes from all the way back to its core wound, to its source, where we can often redo that suffering in a way where we can connect to a healthier know, a sense of empowerment, and not buy into that suffering, like not play it out in the way that we gave ourselves over. So using imagination processes and reconnecting to those early experiences where it feels terrifying to confront the reality that we couldn't say no, or we got taken advantage of, or we got bullied and we didn't have any power to fight back because maybe there were multiple people. We can reconnect to that inner no and find what it's like in the body to re-express that, such that it reintegrates and reconsolidates our nervous system to be more readily available to express anger. Another little exercise we could try is, while watching spiritual teachers or listening to like friends or family or Dharma friends and people on our spiritual path, just run this simple exercise of, I can disagree with this person. Almost like just test the waters a little bit. So the next time you're on YouTube or even like listening to this podcast with me, you could imagine, like, I could disagree with Sam. I could disagree with Angelo DeLulo. I could disagree with Rupert Spira. I could disagree with Gabor Mate. And what that will do is it will bring up any resistance in your body that will say like, oh, no way I could do that. Or like, maybe I could be authentic with them. Right? The body keeps the score and it will surface up any resistance and that is our medicine. Rumi said the cure for the pain is in the pain. When we meet that resistance, then we can bring some compassionate inquiry to it and skill and discernment, which is what I would do with people in session, to really surgically, but also compassionately dissect, okay, what's going on here? And let's break that down and integrate it into a healthier way so that we don't feel maybe we can disagree with the spiritual teacher. Maybe we can disagree with the friends, the family. And this is obviously stuff that I've worked with myself. So another thing that we can do is work with a facilitator, someone who encourages us to, feel into these early woundings, feeling into, why do I do this fawn response? What do I get out of it? Where did it come from? And really getting to the root rather than just the superficial presentations, because, non-duality would tell us just rest with sensation. And then when we, how is that working out for us when we just rest with sensation? I believe we need to go into the roots. And especially for fawn types, people who fawn like this, finding their inner sovereignty, having a facilitator actually guide them to find their own inner compass. What do I think? What do I feel? What are my true emotions? What are my true thoughts and opinions that I have on this person? Do I trust this teacher? Or do I trust myself more here? Can I express my anger here? Or do I feel like I need to fawn? Okay, well, let's meet that. Let's actually really compassionately and firmly meet that. What do I get out of that? Because there's some utility there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. Otherwise, my nervous system wouldn't be doing it. So let's actually really understand that. Let's take the time and the care to slow that down, that whole mechanism, and work through the protective layers that are shielding me from doing that. Like, I don't want the spiritual teacher to see this, because then they'll see that I've been a fraud all along, that I haven't been showing my authentic self. Okay, let's meet that protective layer. Yeah, I can be here too. No problem. That's been there for a reason. Okay, what's underneath that? There's a real fear here. I do not want this person to see this. Okay, let's be with that. Okay, what's that getting for us? Nice, okay, I see that. Let's keep following it down. And then often what we find is that there is a root in childhood experience. The body keeps the score and it tells us these things. And then often what's felt is a release. It's like, of course I do that. Not punishing ourselves like, I'm such a piece of crap for fawning. But no, wow, of course I do that. Like when my mum used to sort of neglect me and not let me be my authentic self, then of course I needed to fawn to her, or of course I needed to like constantly audit my scenario and my environment, because man, like my childhood upbringing was just so ripe with conflict that I needed to be constantly on the lookout. Like these examples are sort of like the sorts of things that can come up that I've seen, not only in myself, but in others as well. So they're quite common with people with a fawn response. So yeah, working with a facilitator is another option that's very powerful to accelerate that process significantly to get to those core places and drive that transformational change at the embodied level. So check out the links in the description to work with me. But really with any teacher or facilitator that you resonate with, that you can trust, as long as this facilitator points you towards your own power, points you towards your own inner authority, and toward more authenticity in your expression. I think that's valuable. So to wrap this up, as non-dual seekers, it's very easy to cling to spiritual teachings such as resting as awareness, but it's very critical to recognize that we can do that out of early developmental trauma, and we can latch onto these teachings to stay safe in the paradigm of being a spiritual overgiver, being a sort of really nice person, being a good listener, just resting back, being a doormat, not setting boundaries, not being connected to our anger, and not expressing our true self. So while it is valuable to have the recognition of our true self, in tandem with that recognition, it's critical that we reconnect to our authenticity as well. And we start trusting ourselves. Really critical process of developing self-trust. And through that process, by meeting these places with compassion and curiosity, not rejecting aspects of self, really inviting in the totality of experience, such that we're not rejecting like aspects of like, say, anger or sadness as being like unspiritual, but rather welcoming the entirety of ourselves. That's really connecting to more of the non-separation aspect that I think that non-duality really is trying to communicate. But unfortunately, we can really like cling to these teachings of resting as awareness as a way to bypass and accessing the pithiness of the human experience. So yeah, if this episode resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts, share your insights on maybe like some of the things that are coming up for you in this episode, what came up for you, and just any questions in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more sort of like trauma-informed non-duality episodes like this. And if you want to work with me, links are in the description. Make sure you sign up to the newsletter for the announcement of my 90-day program, where I'm really going to take this to deep levels with people in a tight, small amount of people. Actually, I don't want to take too many on, but people who are very earnest about this. So subscribe to the newsletter for that. And much love to you. I hope you found this helpful and insightful.